If you're like me, you've got a drawer full of screwdrivers with plastic handles from various manufacturers. And while these screwdrivers look great, sometimes a hand-forged screwdriver just looks and feels a little bit better. But can we make one that performs as well as these store-bought screwdrivers? Welcome back to Black Bear Forge. Back when I was attending the rendezvous on a regular basis, I used to make screwdrivers that were kind of primitive looking that people could carry in their shooting bags. So they had a screwdriver for adjusting their flintlock or something like that. But they weren't always the best screwdriver. They looked good, but they didn't always perform the best because they were really very crude and very simple. And most people had something like this back in their camp if they actually needed to do any work on their rifle when they got done at the shooting range. Let's see if we can make a rustic, primitive looking screwdriver. But let's aim at making it function as well as a modern screwdriver. So we're going to take some design tips from a new screwdriver, but we're going to apply that to something that is entirely forged. So if you have an old coil spring and the pile of stuff that you've been collecting hoping you'd find a good use for, this might be a good use for it. We'll be able to harden it if we want to, and even if you don't harden it, it's still going to be a lot tougher than mild steel. This one happens to be 3/8 inch in diameter or about 10 millimeters in diameter. And I'm just going to straighten out a little bit of it, cut it off, and that's what we're going to use to make our screwdriver. Yeah, I decided to straighten out a fair amount of it and then cut it off. If you can really get a good pull on that and get the whole thing hot, you can unwind the whole thing, but I'd rather store it coiled up myself. This will, of course, result in enough material for quite a few projects. Now clearly this bar is considerably larger than your average screwdriver, and to some extent I'm okay with that, but I don't want it that much bigger. So the first thing I'm going to do is square it up and then draw it out a little bit and get down to more like, oh, maybe a 1/4 inch square. This is going to be kind of a rustic, primitive screwdriver, not anything fancy. I'm not trying to compete with Snap-on. And of course, drawing out over the horn is faster. I'm going to leave it a little bit thick right at the end where I'm going to forge the blade of the screwdriver. Remember, I'm working in spring steel, so it gets stiff pretty fast as it gets cold. So let's go back to the fire. So that's drawn out all I really need. Let's clean it up on the face of the anvil. That has a very slight taper to it, which I'm pretty happy with. It's an effect you see me use quite a bit because I do like that taper that makes things a little heavier and more substantial at the handle end, but a little bit lighter and better balanced as it gets to the working end. Now we need to spread this out. It's really about the size of this commercial screwdriver, so it's not going to take too much. A little bit of cleanup right there. Then I'm just going to spread this out. Now don't make it too thin. The object here is going to be to refine this with a file or a grinder. You just want enough screwdriver shape there that you don't have to do too much work with a file or grinder. And that is considerably bigger than this screwdriver, so we have plenty of material to work with. It's definitely too thick at this point, and I like that. Now let's decide how long we're going to make it. I'm just going to put a simple ring handle on this, but I'll put it fairly big so it kind of fits the palm of your hand. So I think I'm going to cut it off way back here, and then I'll start tapering it again from the fat spot out, and the ring will take that taper and then from here in. Hopefully that'll make sense when we do it. I'm going to leave about that much for my ring. I'm going to go all the way around the circle to cut this off so the little bit of rag is centered in the middle instead of all being off to one side. And hopefully it'll blend in when we file it, but we will see. We'll come back to the horn to draw this out. Now, how long do you want to draw this out? And I don't mean how much time do you want to spend. I mean physically, how many inches do you want here? Now, if you are familiar with the mathematical number pi, or 3.14, hopefully you know then that is 3.14 inches its circumference. So if we just round that down to 3 inches, or round that down to 3 times, and you made this 3 inches long, you're only going to have a 1-inch diameter circle. A little bit smaller, actually. And I'd rather have a bigger circle than that. That right now I'm at about 4.5 inches, so that'd be about a 1.5 inch circle. I think I'm going to go just a little bit further, and then we'll round this part up. Just want to make sure this is a nice even taper. And down to a fairly small point, because I'm going to put a little curlicue on the end. But you draw it out square even though I want it round. I can also use this opportunity to straighten that part of the shaft of the screwdriver. And now I'm going to go to octagon. Now you could actually put a tang on this with a little shoulder and put it in a wooden handle if you wanted to. I've made these with antler handles. Lots of options. Just smoothing it up now, very little forging happening at this low heat, but it helps knock all the scale off and leave a real nice smooth finish. Now we're going to want to put a little curlicue in the end. First I'm going to go to the grinder real quick, and I'm just going to clean that little burr that we have left from cutting. Just a little curl on the end to give it a nice finished look. And we want to go ahead and, starting right about there, make our bigger ring. By the way, from where we're going to start our bend, we are at 6 inches here. So that should leave a ring just a little smaller than 2 inches, maybe 1 3/4 inches. We could do the math more exact if we wanted to. Now we'll just bend that up. Now in mild steel, I usually quench that little curl, but in the spring steel, I'm afraid that would cause a stress crack, and that I really don't want. So we're just going to forge it up like this and try really hard not to hit it. It's looking pretty good. It's a little wobbly on the sides. We'll put that on a cone mandrel and we can really fix it up nicely. This is where quenching that curl would come in handy, but just be careful with it. Now you can see this is not perfectly straight through there. So if you can get it across your anvil, that's a good place to straighten that. Otherwise an anvil block or something like that, or 2-horn anvil if you got that, would be real good for that. And while you don't find too many modern screwdrivers with a twist in the middle of them, that's something I always used to put in the ones I made for the rendezvous, or the muzzle loaders, or whoever you want to call those people. So let's put a twist in this. And I'm going to heat it up this way. One, because this section is heavier, and if I put it in the forge further, it'll heat up more. And then also I think it'll be easier to clamp this part in the vise and hold this part with a twisting wrench. The other thing I would like is for my screwdriver blade to be in the same plane as the ring, which currently it is not. So we'll just twist it up an extra little bit. This is not twisting as fast in here, even though it was hotter. So I'm going to just heat it up a little bit more with a torch. It really doesn't matter. This twist doesn't have to match anything, so if you're happy with it being a little bit different rate of spiral, you can go with that. Personally, I'd like it to be the same, but I don't always feel that way. It just depends on the day. So I'm pretty happy with that, other than the fact it's really crooked. So a wood stump and a rawhide mallet is a great combination for straightening a twist like that, or any twist. Not going to affect the screwdriver much if it's a little bit wonky, but it's going to look weird. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to just clean up that end a little bit. You can see it's got a little wobble in it, so we'll fix that. Put my touch mark in right there. This is another one where there's only room for part of my usual touch mark. So I'm just going to put my last name in there. I suppose I could put the other one on the back side. And we can get them both that way. But I can't get them both one on top of the other like I usually do. And that's why my touch marks are kept separate. Mostly I just want to get this straight and in line both directions. I'm hoping that it's a little bit bigger and thicker than I need it to be. And that way I will be able to file it or grind it to its final shape. So because this is spring steel, the last thing I'm going to do is bring it up to temperature and then just let it air cool to normalize. Other than that, we're about done. Next is filing. Oh, and by the way, the ring ended up 2 inches outside diameter. Just what I was after. How many videos do we come to this vise after the forging? Seems like a pretty common theme to me. Which ought to tell you something about whether or not you're going to spend all your time in the shop at the anvil, or if you need to figure you're going to spend some time at the vise. First thing I want to do here is I'm just going to clean up the profile and try and get it even and looking good. Like I say, when I used to do these for the muzzle loading crowd, they were much simpler, much cruder. They were made out of mild steel, so they didn't hold up as well as they should. They were just something to put in your pouch so you could adjust the frizzen screw to hold your flint in or something like that. And that was about all anybody ever really did with them. I intend for this one to be more of an actual functional screwdriver. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Pretty much the same size as our store-bought screwdriver, but it's much, much thicker. So here I have a typical screw, and this one fits a little bit loose, so I'd want it bigger than that, but this one doesn't even come close to fitting, so I definitely want to get it down so it fits in the screw slot. Now, old screws used to have a slot that was tapered in them. And that meant that old screwdrivers were tapered. And that way it fit down in there and it was a wedge fit and they held really well. New screws have parallel slots in them. And that means a screwdriver should be parallel or nearly so in the same size as the, sorry, lousy drawing. But anyways, it should be the same size as the slot. The problem is most new screwdrivers are somewhere in between this. They still have a taper, and that means they only ride up here on this corner when you're trying to twist the screw in, and that's why they pop out. It's always trying to push the screwdriver out of the slot. So if you can get a perfectly parallel blade into a perfectly parallel slot, it's going to stay put better, and slotted screws quit being such a big issue. So I want to try and file the blade of this screwdriver parallel and as nearly exact to my sample screw as I can. Now you may want to try different size screws. If it fits a number 8, it may not fit a number 6 so well. So you may want to try a small range of screws. Of course, if you get into bigger screws, you might just want to make a bigger screwdriver. But anyways, that's our goal. And we're going to try and do all that with a file so we can sneak up on it and not get carried away, because a grinder will move way too much material way too fast. So I'm going to take a look at this and see if it needs any other shaping first. And it does kick off this way, so I'm going to start here and file that so it's more even, and then try to get everything straight and parallel. Is it going to work if it's tapered? Well, it'll work as well as a low-end modern screwdriver. But I think if you buy really high-dollar screwdrivers, you get better fitting screwdrivers. So by using a half-round file and starting back from the edge, remember this only goes in 1/8 of an inch or so, so you don't really need a 1/2 inch of parallel. You just need that end to work and fit right. Now, a file can be a very precise instrument, especially in the right hands. I don't know if mine are the right hands, but I at least understand the potential. It's a a little bit fatter on this corner. This is a fairly fine file. That starts into the slot, so the tip is good, so I want to work back a little bit and get it more parallel. Make sure it's square across the end as well. Okay, that fits very nicely. If you're watching this on a big screen TV, you might actually be able to see that, but otherwise you just have to take my word for it. So that's just exactly what I'm after. It's almost hard to pull out. After hardening and tempering, I might try to just polish that up a little bit with some sandpaper. Although I've noticed some real high-dollar screwdrivers, that's actually textured so it doesn't slip out, so maybe cleaning it up isn't the best idea. But anyways, it's time to harden and temper this. And I don't think this needs to be just super hard. The only reason it needs to be hard is so you don't twist that little thin end of the screwdriver, which makes it about useless. So we're going to go ahead and heat it up. We're going to harden it, and I'm only going to harden about this much, the part that I'm worried about twisting. Once it starts getting into this heavier area, I'm not worried about it anymore. Because it was an old coil spring, I'm going to quench it in oil, and I'm kind of making an assumption that that's the right thing to do. Then I'll polish it up with some sandpaper a little bit and use the torch to temper it. That way we can get a pretty good temper on it. I think tempering it in the toaster oven isn't going to temper it back quite as far as I'd want. I don't want it to be brittle. I don't want it to snap in use. I just don't want it to twist in use. And of course, don't forget to preheat your oil. Now the oil I use for hardening and tempering is a commercial heat treating oil. It's not just old motor oil. It's a product I bought from a local petroleum supply house, so I'm not really sure exactly what the brand is, but something like Parks 50 is a popular brand of heat treating oil. McMaster Carr sells a couple of different viscosities or temperature ranges of heat treating oil. Either one of them is probably fine for what we do in the blacksmith shop. Somebody out there sent me a link to Black Bear heat treating oil. I may buy that the next time just cuz and see how it does. By the way, the poetry is completely unintentional and comes at no extra charge. I'm going to bring that up to heat real slowly. Let it soak with the forge off like I usually do. You can put this inside a tube and heat the tube up as well. Somebody suggested that for our pizza cutter, but I don't have a piece of tube big enough for the pizza cutter. I'm sure I could find something for this, but I'm not that worried about a high precision heat treat on this. Okay, that's pretty close to what I want. Into the oil. Move that up and down in the oil. And then in a figure-8 motion, keep it moving. And I want to cool the whole thing because I'm going to temper it with a torch. This doesn't take long. It cools off pretty quick. The oil also results in kind of a baked-on oil finish. Be nasty for anything you were eating with, but for a screwdriver it should be just fine. The file we used previously will still cut that, but not as easily as it did before. So I think that's not a bad hardness, at least not in my book. I'm going to get a little bit of sandpaper, and we're going to polish that up so we can see the tempering colors run a little bit. I just want to polish the tip up. I don't want to polish the entire thing. I'm going to get this done pretty quick. Once it's been hardened, it is stressed, and it could just spontaneously crack if you're not careful. It's enough that I can see it, and I'm just going to use the propane torch. It should be plenty hot enough for something this small. I'm going to start heating back here. I'm going to go into the purple or dark blue range on this. I want to make sure I've tempered the entire area that was quenched. So this will temper further back up here, which is heavier, so that's okay if it's not as hard. And then I want to kind of work it down. Once I start seeing colors running into the blade, then I will just let those move. There's the bronze, and then back into the oil. Making something like a screwdriver is mostly just a fun project. I don't know how practical it is. You can buy the most expensive screwdriver out there and still probably not have paid for your labor to make this, but it's fun, it's a good exercise, it helps you do some controlled work, and it can be useful. I don't know if this is going to be your go-to screwdriver all the time, but it's certainly functional, and that's a fairly comfortable handle. You can get some good leverage with that. It fits the screw every bit as well as the commercial one does, perhaps a little better. It did end up with just a little bit of a taper in the blade that I was trying to avoid. So make several of them and you will get better. Now we could certainly make one to put a wooden handle on. That would probably be a more useful screwdriver. We can make them out of flat material with a wooden handle or slab handles, and those are really interesting screwdrivers, and maybe we'll do all of those at some point, but for today I think we will call this one good. Now if you want to see the close-up photo of the finished screwdriver, you got to wait around to the last 15 or 30 seconds of the video. But anyways, I hope you found this project interesting. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell next to the subscribe button if you want to be notified when I make new videos. Feel free to stick around, watch some of the older videos, share the videos with your friends or on social media, but then try to make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.